Hi, and welcome back to the Bonsai Escape. I'm Mike G, and today I'm going to go over creating Shari on your bonsai trees and discuss a little bit more about that, and be working on this old Japanese or Procumbus nana bonsai that I got, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second. This Procumbus nana, it's an older tree I acquired, I think 4 years ago. And you can see it has some gorgeous movement in the trunk and a lot of growth. And I've done a little wiring to this, actually quite a bit of wiring to it. I'll show you a picture of what this looked like back when I got it. And it was, the one thing that stuck out to me the most was this natural deadwood feature on the top. The entire section was died off, and it just gave it such character. And I've struggled when I began this project to finding a front. This naturally had a clearing, which seemed to appear like that would be the front. The back side actually has a better trunk line, if you can see it in here. It actually has a better view of the trunk. It's leaning forward until you get to the very top, and then you have that big deadwood feature that leans toward the viewer this way. And that's why I really feel like this is probably the best front here, with that deadwood feature being like the main attraction to this, a part of the main attraction. So what Shari is essentially the natural deadwood that starts to show up on the trunks. And I'll show you another example of this on an actual juniper that's been in the ground, that's been left in nature to grow, and what Shari actually does. So this is one of my collected junipers, Juniper virginiana, I think it is. But this was never touched. I haven't done anything to it yet, but being in the ground, planted with all kinds of other junipers, it naturally develops these crazy bends and twists. And over time, nature has its way, whether it's infestation or critters, but we start getting natural deadwood features along the trunk line. And you can see this one has a really nice one that goes up through here, wraps around, and it comes out through here, which at some point was probably a live vein. You can see that it was feeding this branch here because that's the extension of it. This portion down here has died off, which means there's also probably some dead feature around there, but it's where the branch, the veins of this tree, the veins being the cellular vesicles that bring the nutrients up and down the chain, have died off, and then it's established itself to have a new vein. And you can actually, can't see it as well as you can feel it, but you can feel the bulging of this vein on the outside of this trunk, whereas the center is flat. Underneath it, you can't see it, and the top has this hollowing spot because this has been in the ground. It's been in the shade so long before I dug it up that it started to rot. So this will be cleaned out and treated with some lime sulfur just to preserve that. And it just gives it really unique features and character of this composition of this tree. Here, this dead branch that was part of the trunk was another branch, obviously, and it created its own jin, we would call them. This would be a jin dead feature on a tree, a branch that had died off, doesn't have any more supply of nutrients, and it becomes a natural jin. The Shari is kind of just same idea, but more in the main line of the trunk. So this is kind of more of a natural selection of how this tree developed its Shari. The tree that we're going to work on, the Procumbus nana, is an older tree as well, and it has some natural Shari in it that I'll show you. You can actually produce Shari on a brand new little tree, and the tree will determine a new route or path for its nutrient vesicles. And do the same thing. Here's a good example of how Shari develops. You can see the underside of this tree has kind of rotted out. On the back side of this tree, it's a better example. There's the live vein that's going on the outside, the live vein that's going on top, and the center section is the white section, is what we would call the Shari. And this was just naturally happening. Maybe something was rubbing up against this, or it got bent excessively by snow, or who knows what happened to it. But they start to develop. You can see the bulge here, and all this flaky bark is just exposing the next layer of the bark in the tree. But that would be what a natural Shari is, and that's what we're trying to produce on these trees, somewhat artificially, but over time it'll callus over and create a scar, and then that new live vein will swell, and you can be very distinct about where that vein is. So getting back to these Procumbus nanas, these are, I don't know, I'd probably guess 20, 30 years old. And when I acquired them, they were already pretty much a pre-bonsai state. I've done a lot of work on this one, particularly. A lot of trimming back. It was initially a pretty good sized bush, and when Procumbus nana or junipers grow successively and they block out the interior light, we get long scraggly branches with tips on the end, and that's not an ideal composition. So my goal for a couple of years was to reduce that foliar mass and try to encourage some back budding. Junipers don't necessarily back bud easily into hardwood like this, but I do get some back budding into the crotches of the long extended branches, so it's worth a shot. And if that doesn't work and you don't get any back budding in these long extended branches, I try to put some curves in them to shorten up the branch, and that's what I did. I just removed all the wire on this at the early spring before the growing season came, because it was starting to get wire bite. But I haven't done much work other than kind of went through the top and looked at this natural deadwood feature. I still have a lot of bark that needs to come off of here. I treated it with lime sulfur just to help preserve it initially, and to be honest, I think that helps with any remaining bark to get a little flakier. Bark on a tree that is dead, like these branches, it's almost like it's caked on and it's really hard to get off. So the intricacies of getting this bark off these little tiny branches is very challenging. And so I take a lot of time, a little bit at a time. The lime sulfur seems to dry it out more and helps it, I think. Maybe not, but you can see that it's naturally preserving this white feature. Well, the goal is to get this, you can see I've dug into this flaky branching, or the flaky trunk, the bark on it. And underneath is this really pretty orangish glow of fresh bark. And I do like the natural flaky bark. It just gives it age and character. There's one downside to that, is that you can get infestations of bugs and hard to treat once they're in there. So keeping the bark smooth and down to the red-ish, and I'm going to show you here, I've been peeling this away looking for signs of active veins and non-active veins, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But this up here is just picking it away, and I'll get a knife out and we'll start playing with this. But essentially I haven't done much with this tree. This is an example. I got this tree at the same time, and something about that time in the year when I was doing this stuff, I really like these deadwood features, and this tree happened to have that deadwood feature that really stuck out to me. This was really overgrown and a massive bush, and I've slowly reduced it back over the years. And I dug into this one the first time a couple years ago, and I started peeling the bark and treating with lime sulfur to preserve this deadwood feature. And then I traced it down, because if the top died off, that means that there was a live vein feeding it. And on these older junipers that have essentially, whether you call it natural selection or someone artificially did it, this wasn't here before, this Shari. This is what we'd call Shari. There's a distinct difference between the deadwood here feature and the live veins on either side. When you feel this trunk, think of the cylinder of the trunk. it's not perfectly round. And when you feel this, you can feel raised sections. Like this section over here is raised and it's flatter this way, and you can actually feel where those live veins are. And when you trace them up, this vein that's coming from its roots comes up and it goes all the way and starts feeding these lower branches on this side over here. But you can see how I took this dead branch and I traced that vein, that dead part, all the way down through the tree into the back, if you can see, and followed the path of where that natural live vein was on this side. Geez, I'm trying to get the camera in here. The live vein here and the deadwood. When I peeled this bark off slowly and established where it was very easy to find because of the indent in the actual trunk. And over time, I did this about 2 years ago. It wasn't as distinct of a line, but now you can actually see where the Shari, the deadwood, meets that live vein, and this will continue to thicken and harden off and raise up further. So you'll actually, and then eventually I can get in here and carve some nice tree line following the tree's natural pattern, or the tree's grains into the wood, just to make it look a little bit more aged and natural. So that's what I'm going to start working on with this tree today, establishing where those are. What I found was, following this deadwood from the top feature down, I've already picked this away a while ago and I was playing with it the other day, and I can definitely tell that this is deadwood, where it's a lighter brown. And what happens is you follow it down, and again I can feel the thickness this way around the trunk versus this way, it's thicker. You can feel the hollow spots in the raised area that signifies its live vein. And if you trace those live veins, you'll see that they're feeding into this top canopy of growth, whereas the backside, the dead vein, it was feeding this section. So it's kind of easy to separate. So what I like to do is, especially on a tree like this, I like to come down from the top and start working it. I've done the same with trees that have a natural branch that's been dead. So for instance, here's a nodule that was probably a branch coming out that broke off or was cut off. And if we pick down through this far enough, we'll start seeing that there was something feeding it, and we might be able to get some Shari on this side here. But I'm still not sure where the Shari is. I do know, and it's unfortunate, that when I feel that dead vein coming down, it cuts to the back because of this wrapping of this trunk. It cuts to the back, and it seems to follow a pattern where it's going to be most evident in the back of this tree, along the side and into the back side of the tree, not necessarily the front. So ideally it'd be nice to have like the Shari coming up through this front section to give you that appeal. You can tell that this knob, this bend in this trunk, this is some deadwood feature here, so it'll probably wrap around like this, come underneath, and then pass to the back from what I feel. We'll dig in there and see what it looks like in a second. I'm not going to bore you with that part of it because it does take a while, but I will give you some progress updates. One thing that's important to understand is kind of best time to do this in the year. It's mid-May right now, and we're in a pretty strong growing season, part of the growing season, and the tree is really filling out. And ideally I'd want to be trimming this back, styling it, or at least getting it into its proportions in about June, when the first flush of growth is kind of hardened off. A little sooner than that was just going to help weaken the tree. We're getting a lot of energy from these green foliar tips. We'll let that harden off, and then we'll start ramifying or cutting back, trimming back, structurally pruning it just to get it back into its shape. Now, bonsai is a lot like chess, where we have to be thinking a few moves ahead. This tree was potted when I first acquired it. The first thing I did that year was I repotted it into this training pot, this large training pot, just because I wanted to see what the root structure was like. It was in a big nursery pot, and I wanted to get them fanned out and spread. Then I waited until the following year to start doing any work on the canopy and the trimming of the branches, because it was a pretty good bush with some long internodes. And because of that trimming work, I waited a full year. I just let it grow out. And then last year, I believe it was last year or the year before, I gave it a pretty good haircut. And then it's been growing now. It's really recovering. It's filled out tremendously compared to the picture that I'll show you, that I may have already shown you, what I did the trimming on it. And now it's gaining a lot of strength. And the goal with this is to repot this into a smaller pot next spring. And with that in mind, I need to think backwards. How much work do I want to do on this? How much weakening of the tree do I want to create moving into repotting season next year? So I've done a lot of canopy work, and it's developed a lot of strength. I know the roots are strong now. It'll move into, through the fall, into winter, coming out of dormancy. I will repot this, probably do a little work on the roots, and get it ready for next spring. So that's kind of the sequence. With Shari, or even creating gins, because you're kind of working with the deadwood, at least on these trees that have some established gin, Shari that I was pointing out, you can work on that pretty much any time. So that's why I decided now, May, we're not going to really do anything to disrupt the growth of the tree, or even the strength of the tree, because all I'm doing is cleaning up the bark, getting some of that flaky bark off, and working down into where the deadwood is already, without too much interruption into the sap flow. If this was a young tree, like, I don't have too many young ones, but if you have a younger procumbus or juniper that doesn't have natural Shari, because it takes years to develop that, then you can create Shari by just selecting a direction of the trunk that you want to cut out, cut that cambrium out, expose the deadwood, and just make sure you're not cutting off sap floated to branches. That's actually that's a pretty dramatic event for that tree. It's going to go into a recovery mode. With what I'm doing today is not going to really establish too much of a recovery mode with the tree, because I'm not really going to be cutting through any of that live tissue. I'm just looking for the live tissue and kind of selecting where it is. Since these trees are so old, they've already kind of done their natural selection as to where that deadwood is, or what live veins are already in there, and then I'll probably just clean that up. So that's why I'm doing this May. I'll wait probably till mid-June to just do a little bit of structural pruning on this, and then let it sit the rest of the year until next spring, where I repot it. I will have ensured that the tree is strong and ready for that repotting season. It has stored lots of sugar during the winter, and it'll be ready to go. Now, as far as the tools I use, these are really just woodworking tools, chisels, wood carving tools. There are different gin and Shari tools you can get specifically, but I like these. They have a lot of different variations in the tips and the cutting sides. They work pretty well. They have some that have a much flatter contour to them, and they all have different variations in what you can get out of them. So I do like these. I use some basic knives, and these have always been, geez, don't cut myself showing you. But I've always used some, looks like I need to clean this knife, just basic knives like this. I think this was sap from one of the other ones I was working on. I guess I gotta be cleaning my tools a little more often. Knives like that. I have this, it looks like a Rambo knife, if you will. As menacing as that looks, it's really not that sharp. It's good for some different positions, and actually the tip of this has a little curve on it, so it helps me get in and pry some things up, but it's not super sharp on the edges. And if I find something I need to do any trimming on branch, I might do that. So that's the basic setup I have for my gin and Shari work. Gins are a little different, but with Shari, this is kind of what I do. It's just a monotonous little process. Again, part of the whole zen of bonsai is just kind of escaping into your work. So I started working up here, and I've noticed there's a lot of bark underneath the top of this tree that I haven't removed, so I started doing this. Now I know that anything from this point up into the deadwood is going to be dead wood. I've got no live veins up here, there's nothing growing. But just below this is a live tree, a live branch that's growing. So that means it's getting supply from somewhere, and that's around the back side. So what I'll do is I'll work this bark back looking for where the deadwood is and where that live vein is, and that gives me that line of delineation as to where the deadwood is and that live vein. So let me give you a little update. I've been working on this for probably over an hour, and what I've done is I've gone from the top and I've chased the deadwood line down that I could find down into this lower section. And you can see when you peel the thicker bark away, you expose this bright red cambrium layer underneath that. That's live tissue. You can see the line, the delineation line of the deadwood white, and where that sap flow is still going. I got into it a couple spots, and up here you can see that line. One side of this line on this left side is actually still live tissue. I cut the cambrium, I got too far into it, but it'll heal over, and I'll give you an example of what it will look like in a couple instances. This branch down here, you can get in here, there's a live vein on top and a dead branch coming out of the bottom. I did that many years ago, a couple years ago, and you can see how the live vein heals over and curls around, and that's the whole idea of it. Eventually I'll need to carve some of this wood and make a finer detail in the grain, but that's what we're trying to accomplish here. And you'll get a swelling like you are here in this bend of the live vein meeting the deadwood. And all I did was trace these down. I did this up in this section here, and this little branch is being supplied by that vein. You can see how it separates itself. I only came down as far as I could until I started seeing the red cambrium, and that'll just start to fill in. Another good example of how resilient these trees can be is wire bite. Here you can see I've got some pretty significant wire bite on this tree. I must have had a wire on there a long time ago, but the sap found a way around it and circled around. It's even thicker on this side, you can see it. So we cut off the supply and it still found its way around. So in this situation, I need to get a wire brush, nylon wire brush, and start cleaning this bark and looking down below, because I haven't found, I've picked around quite a bit in the base, I haven't found any dead areas, and it may not have one, which is fine. I'll just have to, from this part of the bend, work its way up. I'll clean this up, and I've got a lot more work to do on this section of cleaning it up and getting a bristle in there. It's just delicate, tedious work, and but it pays off. But we do have rain coming, so I'm going to have to call it a day and come at this another time. So I've pretty much completed the deadwood work that I wanted to do on this. You can see I've traced the lines that wrap around. You can see how vivid, bright that red lower layer of bark and cambrium is, and the contrast. Over the next year or two, it'll kind of take its shape of itself and callus over the side and get a nice edge. But I cleaned up the top deadwood feature too, and I think she's turning into a gorgeous tree. I also did a little work on this one, cleaned it up a little bit more. See the contrast. This has a lot of deadwood, and unfortunately it has a really nice vein in the back that you can't really see, but you see how that piece is feeding that whole branch up here. But it is the back, and I have the separation there. That is what deadwood and Shari is like on an old Procumbus nana. Thanks for watching.